representing individuals who can represent themselves, who are equal owner operators. On the other hand, I feel like, especially at Union Cab, where there are issues of scale, where we've gone from about 230 to about 130 members. And so now at this point, it's feeling a little bit better in terms of the power of individuals' voices. Whereas when we were up over 200, I almost feel like maybe we were too big. And maybe there's some sort of magic number in there where you need to start looking to have another agency. But and I guess I'll just lastly say, I feel for you that you're feeling sick. I'm not great today myself, so get through this.
All right, thanks. All right. Anyone else want to talk about why they're here today, what they hope we discuss?
I'm not sure if you're, this is in your purview to be able to talk about, but something around the interface between unions and cooperatives, and how can we support each other?
Oh, sure, definitely. Yeah, absolutely. No, but yeah, everything said today, I feel like we'll definitely touch on here.
Boy, I'm itching to respond to everybody too.
I know, right? We're ready to dig in, but I just wonder one more, anything else? Any last thing before we dig in?
Hi, this is Hillary. Sorry I was late. If no one already asked it, I am interested in how a union co-op, what the union looks like in the governance of the co-op, like how those two things interact.
These are great questions.
Yeah.
All right. So we're going to start, I think, at this point. And I just want to say this, some people here know that I'm not feeling well. I feel concerned about my energy level during this. I hope I will pull it together for this and then crash afterwards. But if I say something that doesn't make sense, it probably doesn't make sense. So you should feel free to ask questions. Hopefully John will know, maybe someone else here will know, maybe I'll realize what I said that was silly. So just to be aware of. So I am Kristen Barker with Co-op Cincy, and John is going to lead us off today. And he's going to give us the big overview of what's going on in the world of unions and co-ops. And I'm going to give kind of a more specific example from our experience with Co-op Cincy. But all those awesome questions you brought up, I feel like we'll both touch on. And as more questions come up, please make sure to bring them up either verbally or in the chat.
Okay, should I just get started? And then, so let me get my screen up and hopefully it will all work well for me. Let's see, okay. So first of all, I want to say today is kind of a fun day because April 9th in 1971, the student workers at the Memorial Union in Madison, Wisconsin, organized the Memorial Union Labor Organization, which represented student workers, and the state responded to that by removing student workers from the state labor law. And because they were state workers, they were removed from the federal labor law. But we kept our union going for a number of years. I served as a steward and president for about really during the 4 or 5 years I was at university. I was president for 1 year and negotiated a contract. So today is the 51st anniversary of MULO, which unfortunately dissolved about 15, 16 years ago, but it was really a great moment. It was the only student worker labor union in the country at the time, and really formed a lot of my attitudes about unions. And one of the reasons I chose to work at Union Cab after leaving college was because I thought worker co-ops are the next step beyond, even better than unions. And I've since changed a lot of my thinking in that. I remember early in the day, we would occasionally have members that would lose an election for the board and then decide to, organize a union, and as a response to not getting elected to the board and stuff like that. And I remember once I was talking with one of the people who he wanted to bring the Teamsters in, and I said I was really excited about that because I've always wanted to be part of Teamsters for a Democratic Union. And so if we got the Teamsters in the Union Cab, I could form TDU chapter as well. And that would be, I think he realized I was just going to be a pain in the side no matter what. So, so that's kind of funny. But I want to say this is kind of a response to one of the questions. Interestingly, Union Cab has kind of a unique history in the labor movement of this country. In my last year or so at Union Cab, I was the business manager, and we were faced with a complaint at the National Labor Relations Board, ironically, by the very person who was trying to bring the Teamsters in earlier. He had been fired for basically sexual harassment and was the director of the co-op, and filed a complaint. And the ruling from the National Labor Relations Board was that due to the low threshold of membership, the power of the members to recall directors and the power of the directors to oversee management, they considered everyone at Union Cab to be a managerial employee and therefore exempt from the National Labor Relations Act. So very interestingly, the Union Cab is actually an organization that the federal government sees as having enough worker power that they are exempt from the National Labor Relations Act. So it's just kind of an interesting little part of union co-op history that Union Cab is a part of, whether or not folks there know it. But so there is a way, you can certainly organize co-ops, even large co-ops, in a way that engages worker power and stuff. And I wouldn't, whether or not you want to do it to avoid a union or not, I think there's a lot of reasons to engage labor unions, and even for Union Cab. And I don't think that any of those rulings should suggest that that means that there shouldn't be a union presence or reasons to engage. But I just wanted to bring that up since it was, part of mention about how to engage. One thing I will say too is that unions are not alien to co-ops. They aren't an outside agency. Unions are in fact made up of the members of the union who are the workers in the company. So unions are intrinsically part of any organization that they represent the workers from. They are not an external group. The different unions, and I'll talk about this in a second, have different ways of organizing. So, there's a saying that I love, that when you've seen one co-op, you've seen one co-op. It's kind of the same with unions. There's not a monolithic aspect. So the way UFCW organizes versus UE, very different organizations. In fact, for those of you that have followed the history of the Williamson Street Grocery Co-op and their unionization attempts, really different dynamic happened with UFCW and UE and organizing campaigns. And so thinking about unions, think of them as independent and unique as our co-ops are. They are the creation of worker power, and so they're going to reflect the members who are there. And there isn't, unfortunately, the way the media presents unions is that there's some puppet master in the back running, telling everyone what to do, but it's really not. It's really the members that are out there working. So one of the things I like to talk about these days is the cooperative enterprise model. And this is kind of some new thinking that's coming out of St. Mary's University and the International Center for Co-op Management. And what it talks about is, cooperatives are purpose driven based on values and principles with democratically governed and, people-centric organizations. And that's, no matter what type of co-op you're talking about, this is still what it is. Traditionally, what they call type 1 co-ops, it's been about meeting transactional needs of the members. So reaching into that market failure, right? Trying to find the space where people can get their needs met. The natural and Whole Foods movement started because of co-ops, basically. Co-ops filled that void in the marketplace, and today they created the small market. So the argument about the cooperative enterprise model is that that's fine for some co-ops as they start off, but really for co-ops to really engage a co-op difference and really have a competitive advantage in the marketplace, they need to be more engaged. They need to be engaged with their community. They need to be engaged with the environment and the society, and they need to actually build solidarity with their larger community that they work within to work on community problems. And this is where you see co-ops really engaging a stronger dynamic in building strength in their community, building customer loyalty, building connections through different movements, and really creating something really valuable and different, and not just simply another business that's running on economic models. And so as we talk about this, in fact, I was earlier this morning, I was working on a chapter on this, is, the interesting thing about worker co-ops is that in worker co-ops, the idea of governance and management is really not as clearly delineated as it is in, say, a consumer co-op. In a consumer co-op, you have a board of directors of consumers that hire management that runs, the store and deals with all the operations. And usually we talk about how those lines between governance and operations it's a really hard line. The board shouldn't be interfering in operations, and they should just be focused on the governance. But in worker co-ops, it's really different, because most of the purpose of the worker co-op has to do with operations. It has to do with creating a humane workplace, a safe workplace. Dispute resolution is in most organizations completely a management function, but in a worker co-op, how you settle disputes, how you handle discipline, that becomes really a governance issue. And so we have to think about how we do this and different ways of doing it. And before I get into talking about, I didn't give myself, I guess, a great introduction here, but I'll try to do it as I go through. And so there are different ways of thinking about this and thinking about how we engage it. And I realize I'm going to be jumping around a little bit. So, but here's, kind of in the broad strokes, there's a union co-op synergy, I think, this is where it really works. So the way I see it, and I should say, part of the many hats I wear is I chair the Union Co-op Council for the U.S. Federation of Worker Co-ops, which is celebrating its 15th year. I'll be talking about that in a few minutes. But one of the ways to think about union co-ops is that worker co-ops need to be accountable to the labor movement. They need to see themselves as part of the labor movement, and they need to be accountable to that movement. And that means really engaging with, at least if nothing else, supporting unions. Likewise, labor unions need to see worker co-ops as part of the labor movement too. And they need to also see and support worker co-ops as part of that. I think Kristen will probably talk about it later, but the USW, and they passed Resolution 27 in 2011 that specifically talks about worker co-ops as a key part of the labor movement and support for it. And then one of the ways they can do this, by holding each other accountable, by working together, is sharing information. Unions can get information about the industry that then they can use to help organize the rest of the industry from co-ops that they might not otherwise be able to get. And likewise, co-ops can get information from labor unions about what is really, what are prevailing wages, what are legitimate benefits, what are best practices for workers, not for investors in their industry and sector. And just as an aside, as an example of this, and it's not a co-op, but some of you know that the Green Bay Packers are the only privately owned, or the only publicly owned professional sports franchise in the United States. And because of that, in the 1970s, the National Football Players Association was able to get the public financial records of the Green Bay Packers. And because of that, they were able to extrapolate from the smallest market in the country to just how much profit the owners were actually making. And this is what led into free agency. So this is a great example of how basically a not-for-profit organization, or sort of not-for-profit organization, but the Green Bay Packers were able to funnel information to the union that allowed it to then fundamentally change in the entire industry for the benefit of the workers. And it's, again, a great place where I think co-ops and unions can work together. And then also, I think one of the things that co-ops really offer is we create a model of what direct democracy looks like. And this can allow co-ops and unions also to avoid isomorphism. So isomorphism is basically a tendency for organizations to look like the most dominant organizations in their community. Sometimes this happens through legal structure, sometimes it's just success begets success. And what happens is you'll see this in labor unions where they have a hierarchical management structure of the union that looks a lot like the people they're fighting against. And it's really weird that they would have that model, but that's what's considered sort of the best way to run a business. Likewise, as co-ops get bigger, they think they have to have this strict hierarchy, sort of Taylorist, function, and they don't. And so, both unions and co-ops can really think and use each other to think about new and better ways of creating management. So one of the issues of size is, size is a real problem if you're trying to use a management structure that's designed to maximize profit, not maximize a humane workplace. But so thinking about what are different ways of doing that. And it just so happens there is a really good way. It's called Sociocracy. I also sit on the co-op circle of the Sociocracy for All. And Sociocracy is, for some of you, without going into a big thing about what Sociocracy is, it's basically creating a hierarchy within organizations based on work, not power. It is designed to have consent, and I think it really works well with unions. Both operate on this principle of good enough for now, safe enough to try. That's basically what a contract is. A collective bargaining agreement is where everyone involved in the collective bargaining agreement consents to the contract. That's another big part of Sociocracy. And of course, because they're agreeing to it, it's safe enough for them to try. And then both aspects, because of that, the collective bargaining agreement and Sociocracy's principles are based around reviewing your agreements periodically. So, for a contract, that might be 2 or 3 years, but it also is something that then really allows you to sort of, in both situations, engage and build a real form of direct democracy within the organization that can elevate both the labor union and the cooperative. And I might add also I think one of the other benefits of union co-ops that I think a lot about is that a lot of the policies that worker co-ops do are things that would be in a collective bargaining agreement. So this can also really, really make the job of being on the board a lot easier. If suddenly 75% of your policies are something that are in a collective bargaining agreement that you only talk about every couple of years when you're negotiating the new agreement, instead of rehashing similar issues every month, which I've seen. So there's some benefits there. So that's kind of a big spiel. There is a lot of a new energy around union co-ops. So the Union Co-op Council began 15 years ago after some conferences and energy around labor work, and then also once Mondragon and the USW signed their memorandum of understanding, it took on a new flavor. We've been working for 15 years to build movement solidarity, to raise awareness, to highlight the different types of union co-ops. There are a lot of different ways that people engage it. We're now seeing similar movements in Canada, in the UK. Co-ops UK just recently had a pretty big event, I think last year, and they have a manifesto for decent work, which is really worth downloading and getting. It really talks a lot about the engagement of unions and co-ops. And of course, the Canadian labor model is a little bit different than what the US and Canada use. So it's keeping in mind how those different labor laws work. But it's growing. There are more and more co-ops seeing unions as an ally and a partner in trying to make the world a better place, not just for the workers, but for the community the workers live in. So the vision of our group is a worker-driven cooperative economy with shared wealth through workplace and economic democracy for all workers. And I want to apologize to the interpreters. I'm probably speaking way too fast and I can't see any signals, so I'll try to slow down. Also, our mission is to build bridges between worker co-ops, organized labor, promoting the sovereignty of labor and subordination of capital. So we have some specific goals. So one of the things we do, we are trying to build case studies around the existing union worker co-ops. We're trying to work with local labor councils and state labor councils to get more information about this model. We're trying to build advocacy within the movement. We're also, I think, in some ways helping the U.S. Federation also reach out. So recently, we helped write a statement in support of the workers at REI in New York City. And definitely within the co-op world, we're trying to push out not just worker co-ops, but also really encouraging unionization of consumer and producer co-ops as well. And then, of course, doing planning and presentations at conferences and whatever research we can do. So in the last year, we came out with a statement on co-op development in unionized workplaces. This was after conversion of an existing set of coffee houses in Ithaca, New York. They were going to convert to a worker co-op, and it turned out that part of the reason for doing the conversion to worker co-op was actually through an end run around and decertify the labor union that was already representing the workers there. So this led us at the council to come up with a statement, and then also guidance for co-op developers in that community of how they need to engage in workplaces that are unionized. So, in the co-op development world, there's not a lot of connection with labor unions because of the attack on labor unions over the last several decades. There are very few states that have double-digit percentage of union jobs. Often they're in single digits, and even those single digits tend to be state workers, so not necessarily in the co-op community. So it's really important for co-op developers, especially now as there's a new drive for unionism throughout the entire country with Starbucks and Amazon, that there's going to be more and more union activity coming up, and co-op developers really need to be part of it. One of our members, Rebecca Lurie, who was supposed to be here today, but couldn't make it, has created a union co-op toolkit to talk about different ways that unions and co-ops can work together, highlighting, of course, Cooperative Home Care in New York, which is the largest unionized worker co-op in the country. And then again, I think, again, making sure that we in the co-op world and the worker co-op community really have accountability to the labor movement, that we're out there making sure that they see us as allies, and hoping then that they will also count us as, that they will also become our allies in our different battles and struggle. And so I'm going to turn over here to Kristen in a second, but we do have a bi-monthly council meeting. Our last one was just yesterday, actually. And we heard from an effort by Cooperative Home Care in New York and SEIU to try to get fair pay for homeworkers passed in New York. It came up a little bit short, but they were on the verge of getting a minimum wage for home care workers at $22.95 an hour, which is an example of exactly the sort of thing that unions can do that standalone co-ops might have a hard time doing, is being able to move that sort of legislation through either the state or at the federal level. So it's a great example of how unions and co-ops can work together. You can attend the bi-monthly meeting. They're even numbered months. You can also join the task force. So case studies, local labor outreach, we're creating presentations to do with local labor councils, also general education, website and outreach, and then member engagement. And I think that's my big presentation. I'll probably do better if there are questions, but I'll put my contact info in the chat and turn it over to Kristen.
Well done. Your contact info was immediate. I'm very impressed. So others may have some questions for him. Before I move into my slides, I just wanted to take a look at your faces and see if there were, if it would be helpful to just answer some of your questions a little bit more directly, perhaps, before I jump in. The tricky part about slides is I can only see a few of you. And it's true, even I can't see, Kimberly, Haley, Renata, Josh Davis, or Charity. Oh, wait, no, I can see Charity. Charity's got two computers, which is a fascinating, cool move. So, I mean, there's a few of you I can't see anyway, but I guess I just wanted to take a moment, to just kind of sometimes slideshows are mind numbing if you've been through them a lot in one day, which I think some of you have. So before I jump into that, I just wondered, maybe I'm going to just see if there's any immediate questions for John. You've given us some interesting ones. He's touched on some, but I feel like we could be even more laser in responding to them before we move into another slideshow. Okay. All right. Well, then I'm going to just quickly just say, you know, like in general, there were so many questions about how do unions, why would a union be advantageous to a cooperative? And John said in his opening statements that he was viewing being part of Union CAB as kind of the next iteration, sort of the next evolution of worker power, because cooperatives certainly support worker power, and labor unions, as John was saying, are all about worker voice, worker power, all about improving things industry-wide. And I love the example he just gave. I'm very sad to hear that that did not pass, that effort in New York, because our home care workers need, I mean, they need to have wages with dignity. They're doing such critical work. But that is, I feel like, a super beautiful example as we stand here at this moment in history with inequality, like going nuts. I just saw an article that we have over 700 billionaires, and like in 1990, we had 70 or something, you know, like just that, how fast things are just pulling apart as we've all been experienced, the climate chaos, these, you know, these institutions in democracy that are just sort of falling apart or under incredible attack. Like, these are enormous issues that we are facing, not even to mention racism, entrenched racism, which we've been dealing with forever. Like, these are things that we need to deal with in solidarity, right? Like, this is not something one worker co-op all by itself can deal with. And that's part of why I enjoy being a part of the cooperative movement, by being a part of the labor movement, by being like connecting in all of these ways, because I feel like us adding our efforts in these ways are the sorts of things that push us in a more positive direction, right? And and so part of what I love about co-ops, Cincy, that our co-ops are part, like really clearly part of the labor movement, is kind of like John said. I mean, we have a home care co-op, we have a childcare co-op, like though neither of those, both of those groups really need some intervention at the federal and state level to be paid proper wages, because families are actually paying a lot for childcare. They can't even pay more, but our childcare workers are not getting anywhere near what they deserve. Like, this is an issue that truly requires intervention. And again, when we're part of these larger groups like labor movements and other social movements, we have a chance to move. When we are uniting all of those workers, all of those work power, we have a chance to move these structures. And similarly, I would say even things like, we also have a variety of co-ops that have immigrants, new immigrants in them with different levels of status. And this is another issue that we need support on. We need policy support on from as many different groups and social movements working on that together. So we like to be a part of that. And you know, anyway, we want to be a part of that. So I think as we look at these huge issues we face, I think it's kind of like, what can we do? Who can we align with? How do we just kind of keep opening things up and being part of these things? And then there's some super practical things as well. So from a practical point of view, something that fascinates me, and I'm going to go into this in my slides, but co-op Cincy came to life as a result of that historic partnership between Mondragon International and the United Steelworkers in 2009. So this was a time where they decided that, anyway, this was an incredible agreement to launch union co-ops here in the United States to support their proliferation. And this was enormously exciting, well, to us in Cincinnati, and to, I feel like, many, many people all over the place. But in Cincinnati, I happened to work for a place called the Intercommunity Justice and Peace Center. And we had sent delegations in the 80s and 90s to Mondragon to say, hey, this is what it looks like. This is what it looks like to see what, like, when you prioritize people over profit, this is like the for real pragmatic example of what happens. And so we had a whole library where I worked. And one of the people that went on one of those tours was the head of the building trades in Cincinnati. His name was Jerry Monahan. He's still alive, actually. But he came, and people call him Moose. And he came to a labor council meeting afterwards. And he said to the labor council, if we ever have a chance to bring this type of Mondragon cooperative to life, we have to jump on it. He's like, I have never seen such worker power. So then, all right, that happened in the early 90s, and fast forward to 2009, when the steelworkers and Mondragon identify this. And I will just say this real fast, by the way. In all of those delegations that went to Mondragon, people would always say, can we do this? Can we actually move the dial on poverty and income inequality like they have done in this part of the world? And what the consensus was from the people that participated, no, I don't really think we can do it here because our context is so different. Like over there, we've got this Basque area because it's in the Basque region of Spain. And we've got this sort of more collectivist thinking. And that here in the US, we tend to think about our white, maybe our family thriving with that white picket fence, like that's kind of what, but in order for us to really move the needle on these things, we have to make it so that it's our whole community thriving, right? Or our whole country, like that's what's working there. And can you take that into this context where I heard something on one of the NPR programs that we are the most individualist country in the world, like they look at all these different scores and there's some benefits, but there's also some drawbacks, right? Like there's some positives to this, but there's some challenges when we're trying to incorporate something like, because part of Mondragon's resiliency, right? They have over 80,000 workers, and in our worker co-op movement, we have like 7,000, but their population in the Basque region is 2.1 million and ours is 330 million. Like what's going on? But it's like part of what their resiliency has been is that 10%, at least 10%, and usually more of their profits go back to the larger whole, right? So the whole cooperative network they're a part of. And that has led to incredible resiliency, not just that, but other policies where workers, like when things are going not so well in one co-op, there's agreements to retrain those workers in other co-ops and hire them on. It's an incredible level of solidarity, right? And so it really, really requires that. And what was so exciting in 2009, as this guy named Phil Amidon was listening and reading the New York Times in this historic partnership, he's like, I think this is what changes it. You get the best practices of the labor movement, that solidarity best practice part, right? And you combine it with Mondragon's experience, and we can create these integrated, deep integrated networks, right? We have a lot of work to do to build this culture here, right? Like we have a lot of training going at us, but we need to really, really focus on building this cooperative culture, but doing this in tandem with the best practices of the solidarity of the labor movement, we really have a chance. And so there was just a lot of enthusiasm. And we kind of really studied it for a while, and then we got to work. And this is our 10th anniversary, really 2011 of November 2011 is when we incorporated. So I'm going to just show you to answer one of your questions about, let me just share my screen for a second. Let me get focused there. All right, let's see here. So people can see my screen. Feel free to interrupt me. Slideshow. Okay, I have too many slides. The first ones are not relevant. I should have started a little, this is our philosophy. How do we create an economy that works for all, especially those who have been historically excluded? Let's see. You know all about co-ops, so we're just passing by, trying not to feel sick. They're all very good. We love co-ops, all of us. Oh, Mondragon, right? We're familiar with Mondragon. I was just talking about them as if everyone knows who they are. Does everyone know who they are? Okay, fantastic. Okay, so these are, instead of the 7 international cooperative principles, these are the 10 that they follow. And what's interesting, by the way, I'll just go back for a second, is they make it, and this really kind of jives with the labor movement pretty well. The 3 that are a little bit distinct from the regular ones are really the sovereignty of labor, the instrumental and subordinate nature of capital, and wage solidarity. So they're really kind of highlighting these ones. So in some ways, those are, you know, kind of intrinsic to the, or implied in the regular 7 international cooperative principles, but they really wanted to kind of underscore them. That labor is sovereign, and that capital, while a tool, while very important, is subordinate. And we want to have wage solidarity for things to thrive. So these are things, incidentally, that are really well liked by the labor movement. All right, I'm moving past Mondragon because we all know, and I told you about that. Here, people had questions about what is the structure of a union co-op. And this is the structure. This is a structure that is fairly common. So say there are worker owners, the worker owners in many co-ops, you know, not all, elect a board of directors, right? And often in co-ops, a board of directors will select management. So these are pretty typical, right? And you know that worker-owned co-ops are run in all kinds of ways, as collectives, as et cetera, right? Like, but this is just kind of one way of thinking about it. And if we think about it, this is also very common in just most cooperatives of any kind, right? That there is an election of board of directors that happens through the members. Very often, the board of directors selects management. This is true in Mondragon. This is true in our co-ops in Cincinnati. But something that Mondragon added that I think is very interesting, in addition to the solidarity that exists there, right, and that deep network that I think has led to their resiliency, they have created something in this model, we're calling it a union committee, but they call it a social council. So for them, when they get to 50 workers, there is always a social council. So like the board of directors, they're thinking long-term, like, all right, what is our long-term vision, right? And the management is about how do we make sure we're going to be implementing, how do we support everyone towards implementing this vision we've all agreed on. But the social council in Mondragon, which got double downed on after they actually had a strike in the 70s, because even though it operated as a co-op, even though technically people could have voted out their supervisors, there was still a lack of enough communication, defined communication channels. So they feel that when you get to 50, there's something that happens. There's between those in management and those in the shop floor, there's not necessarily enough input defined. So what they call their social council is a place for handling conflict that naturally arises, making sure input is constantly occurring. It's a reinforcing structure basically to help them live their values, right? And so here in this union co-op model, based on their experience, we're calling it the Union Committee. And we've already talked about Cooperative Home Care Associates. They came to being as a union co-op prior to the Mondragon agreement, and they call this particular thing the Labor Management Committee. So they're all fairly similar ideas, but a little bit different. So who elects the union committee? This is elected by the workers, all workers, whether you're worker owners or not. That's part of, I think, a benefit of a union in terms of being another reinforcing structure for those people who are on a path to ownership but haven't arrived. This is a group that actually also supports and represents all of their interests. I'm going to stop for a second and take a look at your faces, if I can. Let me see. Stop sharing. Aha, that's right, I can. Are there questions right here? Kimberly.
Hey, wow, I love the way you said my name. I love the song. Yeah, okay, so is the union committee the social committee? Are they the same thing?
Like the social council in the Mondragon
right.
experience is similar to the union committee. The difference in the United States, well, the difference, at least in the union co-ops that are following this Mondragon steelworker agreement, is that the union committee actually has a formalized agreement with one of the unions. So in Cincinnati, a number of our co-ops are with the United Steelworkers, some are with the United Food and Commercial Workers.
Okay, so I see. I think I maybe just missed that there was a switch. We weren't like talking about Mondragon anymore, but okay, so that, and then my other question is, kind of talking about, well, okay, so in talking about Mondragon, you said like when you get to 50, it like, is that 50 workers? And I think something else I struggle with, and maybe because I'm not super familiar with union organizing, is the distinction between management and workers. I mean, it seems kind of strange because it's like the managers are also workers. And so I'm not sure how
it's so interesting. And those are great questions. So first of all, I would say that yes, in Mondragon, they can have a social council before 50, but after 50, like everyone has to have it. And for us, we have started with most of our co-ops with the union right in the get-go, because we're wanting to build them for the ability to scale well and with values intact. And so none of our co-ops at this point have 50. I can't wait till they do, but none of them do. But many of them have unions. And who's in the union, she asked. And this is a weird thing. So it's fascinating because our Harvest, which is our first co-op, which just is celebrating 10 years this week. I'm so glad they lived, but they are farm and food. They're a farm and food hub, and they have about 15 workers. And in this case, every single worker is part of the union. And the board president is the person that is involved with, which is me, which is the person that's involved with the union. I'm the person that signs all of their collective bargaining agreements and so forth. And it's been a very funny process, actually, because so we've with our Harvest, we've done it a few different times now, probably like, I don't know, 4 maybe. And the person from the union, the person who services us, she says it's really hard to tell like who's on, because like sometimes the workers will be saying things like, I'll say, I feel like we should up the baseline like wage here, and they'll want more flexibility because they know we've had, like, everyone knows all of the financials, right? And this particular co-op has really struggled. And I'll say, well, but what if we just, but anyway, so it's just, she's like, it's just very an interesting kind of dynamic. Her name is Paige, and she thinks they're a lot of fun. All of our union the whole piece of it. But I feel like it is to what John said. It's really, really lovely to have a reason to write down all of your personnel policies and get insight from groups that work with us all the time. So almost all of them, like he said, it's not every single last thing, but most things are in our collective bargaining. Most big things are in our collective bargaining. So there's just a lot of clarity as any new person comes in at how it works. And that kind of that's a real benefit. But I will tell you, like in other co-ops, the CEO, the person who may be a CEO at the moment, is not in the union and everyone else is.
Yeah, if I can jump in. So I work with a group called Working Systems here in Olympia, and they're a union co-op. They write software for labor unions too. So it's kind of cool that that's what their focus is helping labor unions. And what they do is their general manager is not a member of the co-op, but has his own contract that the board negotiates with the general manager. So the general manager then negotiates the collective bargaining agreement for the members. The board really stays out of it, but then the board negotiates with the general manager directly. So he still has a contract, even though he's not in the union.
That's helpful. So I'm going to show you some slides about how a union can be helpful. We've talked about some of those, but that's what's next. Oh, yes, go, please.
I'm just curious with regard to the social councils. Do you see more participation because they're smaller aggregates? Because you've read, like when you have groups of 50, does that like engender a greater sense of group? Do they represent themselves? Does each council get to be represented on the board differently than if it was just a mass of people?
So it's not.
And the last question would be, are there ever conflicting interests between the different social councils, and how is that mediated?
So there's one social council per co-op in Mondragon. So even if they have, like, for example, Aroski, which is their worker and community-owned grocery store chain, which has 40,000 workers, there's one social council. They have different, like they do meet in smaller groups, but it's really just one social council that they all kind of are part of. It's not like lots of different ones. And in our harvest and in all of our small co-ops, it's also just one union committee.
Where did I hear the 50 number come into play?
That's when the social council gets mandated in Mondragon. When you have 50 employees, it gets mandated.
Okay.
So some people choose to do it earlier than that, but it gets mandated at that point because their experience has been that you need reinforcing structures to keep everything rocking and rolling.
Okay. I thought that they would be broken up into multiple councils.
Yeah.
All called social councils within the same organization, which I think might actually be a good idea, but
yeah, no, I can see that as a good idea. I mean, and then I was starting to think of how Aroski does it, which is not called that way, but I mean, they meet in smaller groups, right? Like in all the different stores, they have over 2,000 stores. I mean, it's so they do meet kind of like unions do. And I think almost in locals geographically a little bit like that. So I'm going to go back and share my screen again and just go through a few things related that I think we've touched on, but just to sort of emphasize a bit more, maybe. All right. So why a union co-op? Unions help balance They help balance out the democratic workplace. So that's one of the things I was talking about in some places. So one of the things I think that can be useful is if there's a minority of viewpoint on something, this is another balance, another form of balance that exists. For those that are on the pathway to ownership, but aren't worker owners yet, this is another level of support. Access to improved and affordable benefits. That's pretty lovely. Having a union connects the co-op to a platform of acting in solidarity with other workers. We've talked about that. It offers a direct connection to a movement of workers in the same industry, pushing for better pay and working conditions industry-wide, and opens up policy advocacy opportunities as well. So Co-op Cincy, this is us. Right now, well, actually there's 14, there's one missing. Co-ops and growing, and we have a loan fund, and well, I'll just show you what we do next. Oh, that's what we want. We want an economy that works for all. And these are the 4 ways we work towards that: by supporting the launch of new co-op businesses through Co-op U, by assisting existing businesses to transition to worker ownership. That's something that John was just talking about. By providing ongoing support to our existing network of co-ops and being involved in all sorts of statewide and national co-op networks, including One Worker, One Vote, which is a national network of groups that are bringing that union co-op model into life. So we work with all kinds of cool people. I'm going to just rush through this to see if there's anything. This is one of our Co-op U classes. This is how we work with existing, we had just existing companies to transition to worker ownership. And then here are some of our existing co-ops. This is our Harvest, Sustainergy. This is a really cool way of doing affordable housing and building. This is a land trust. It's a little different, but it's a cool thing. A cleaning co-op, compost, touch of home care, massage for the people, a food truck, working on a full service grocery store. This one just transitioned. This is a really cool apparel company and grocery delivery service. And these are some of the networks that we are a part of. And we host something every 2 years. If this interests you, we did it last year, and it'll be again, not this year, but the following, a union co-op symposium, and people from Mondragon participate, and people who are bringing union co-ops to life wherever there are, which we can talk about a whole lot more of cool things around the country. In this picture, we're actually sitting in Gem City Market, which is in Dayton. This is another group like Co-op Cincy that incubates a network of worker-owned union co-ops. And we're sitting in a worker and community-owned grocery store there that came to life in May of last year, which was super cool. So, oh yeah, this is also different at this point, but now we've loaned over $700,000 to co-op businesses. And that's through our connection to Seed Commons, which is a phenomenal financial cooperative that allows us to loan. And there's 89 people involved in our co-op network and so forth. So I am going to stop that just to give you kind of a quick sense in case there was anything you wanted to ask about.
I just want to say the Union Co-op Symposium is one of the best co-op conferences out there, because it's one of the few where you are not just with true believers of co-ops. It really brings in so many people from outside the co-op world who are learning about co-ops for the first time. And it's a great place for really exchanging ideas and building synergy in our work. So it's one of my favorite ones to go to.
That's cool. Oh, so I want to just take a look at some of the questions that we haven't yet touched on. Now, we have examples of how I have examples, John has examples of how unions really directly work within each of our co-op situations. We've even gone through a termination process and followed the whole union process. And we have all kinds of examples and found it really helpful. I mean, a million things, but I want to make sure. So I'm just trying to think back. Oh, wait, let me look down here. Thanks for the details. Oh, nice. Thanks, Sherry. So I'm just trying to think of any of the questions we didn't answer yet or answer effectively. Yes, Kimberly.
Hey, well, yeah, I know I've asked a couple questions already, so happy to give space. I'll kind of say a couple on my mind, and you can decide what to spend time on. One is what a termination process is. A second is if there is, like I've looked at the Mondragon Wikipedia page and been sad about like the lack of detail on how they structure it. So if there's any like good documentation of Mondragon, and then a little bit more general is going to your point about American individualist society. And I generally believe you, but I'm kind of curious to get like into how, like why that it seems like Mondragon is less replicable here.
Oh,
yeah.
Well, answer the termination thing quickly, and then I would say it's a matter of opinion, but about the Mondragon thing before. But so in our harvest cooperative, a worker owner got fired, and that worker owner decided to take it through the John, what's the name of the process? It's through the union to take it through
the grievance process.
Yes. Thank you. So to take it through the grievance process. And so our harvest went fully through that with the worker, and it was, and the worker ended terminated still the worker owner. But it was I felt like it was a very positive and thoughtful and healthy process that everyone, I don't know, it felt like a good thing to do. And I mean, we've all kind of come out on the other side and in really good, actually we all get along. So it seemed like a positive process. There are two more questions, I think, Kimberly, before we go back to the fascinating one that we can all kind of debate on, because I think it's a matter of opinion and we should just think about some of the things, so many things in our world. I mean, we have to look at the context that brought Mondragon to life. They had some interesting things going on, like they were cut off from the world in Franco's Spain. And so there was no ability for years they had sort of no external competition for years. So that was a thing, but then they've really adapted to external competition. So, I mean, in addition to this level of solidarity, but I think that would be an interesting question for us to end on and just get everyone's perspective on it, I think, or whoever wants to. But there are two other questions I see. So Josh and Steve, how about that? Or maybe, is that cool?
Okay.
Did Josh leave? Oh, there you are. Got you. Are you on mute, Josh?
Yeah, we're not able to hear you.
Sorry. Okay, this should be better. Yeah. Okay. So.
Oops, you cut out again.
Do you want to use the chat, Josh? And maybe Steve could go with his question and then we'll come to you.
So.
Okay, Steve.
Thank you. I'll lower my hand in a minute. We are a small startup worker co-op. We're actually a multi-stakeholder co-op. We have consumer owners, worker owners, producer owners, and investor owners. But we are essentially a worker co-op and very small. We're extremely busy trying to set up the co-op. And so adding another layer when we've got people serving on 3 or 4 committees at the same time, adding another layer just seems like a big problem. What's the actual cost of setting up a union committee?
Well, that's interesting. I mean, so, I mean, the cost of being part of the union, like it varies with each union, but it's a certain amount of dues.
I'm sorry.
But you're wondering what the time?
The time cost. Yeah.
I feel like that can really vary based on whatever you're wanting. So like your union steward might end up going to some additional union steward meetings that are out in the world. In terms of, there's a cost around like getting there's a time cost related to getting a contract negotiated. And I think that depends on like how much agreement there is and so forth. There's not a specific, you don't have to meet a certain amount of times. There's like nothing that's like kind of set in stone. That can be very much determined by what works, especially if a group is really small and you're meeting all the time in other ways. It may be unnecessary, but it's useful to still have something like some meetings that are carved out for this particular focus, like things related to human resources and items that would be in a contract, you know. But it's not like you have to meet like once a month or anything like that.
Okay. Thank you.
Ah, I see Josh's question now. It's easier to read at this point, which is, how do you ensure that unions involving themselves in worker co-op work are not undermining, even if inadvertently, our co-op values?
The example he's asking about is in the chat right before that
Oh, okay.
for the
Awesome.
context.
Oh, thank you.
Mhm.
The SEIU is currently pushing a piece of legislation in California that would form a worker co-op federation, but the bill is written such that the worker owners of the member co-ops would have no control over the wages, working conditions, etc. Oh, well, that's interesting.
You didn't know about this?
Well, is this what Ray is working on?
Yes. Yeah. And I've
Josh, or John, are you
I have
frozen? Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, sorry, I don't know what's going on with my. I have spoken with Ray about this. Yeah, and that is what Ray is working on. And she told me directly that the worker co-ops that she had talked to all said that this was not a good worker co-op, and yet they're still going through with it or for it. So I'm wondering just how we make sure that, you know, keeping our stuff pure and not having the isomorphism kind of thing that John talked about with maybe less than democratic unions.
Well, I can say Ray is also on the executive council of the Union Co-op Council or committee, and also on the advisory board for Oregon New Economy with me. So it's definitely something we'll probably be talking about and trying to fine tune it. I know also in California, they have a worker ownership recovery committee council. I forget its actual name. And that is kind of in a leadership position and pushing policies. So I think that's probably where a lot of that discussion has to happen. But I think you bring up the point is that labor unions don't necessarily get co-ops either. So it is a question of constant education and work.
Right.
And as I understand it, the federations, it wouldn't force people into it, that it is a voluntary.
Sure. Yeah. And
I think this is the part of trying to create Mondragon in the US within a US construct that is so difficult, because people want that level of scale to be able to achieve systemic change. But you know, the US isn't Spain. The US is literally 50 different Spains and Puerto Rico, right? So that you can't, there isn't a federal version of an organization for co-ops. And so it means we have to think about it on a state by state basis and what different state laws allow and engage with it that way.
Right. I mean, so I guess apart from that particular, I'm just wondering about like more general in dealing with, you know, unions, you know, all unions are the same. my mic.
Yeah, Josh, it's so hard to hear from you, but are you asking more generally about?
Yeah, more. Oh my God.
About like how it might show up in a rate, like just in an individual cooperative, like how there might
Right.
be some
Well,
accidental undermining. Is that what you're saying?
yeah. Oh, I'm sorry. I read labor notes, right? And I'm very aware that a lot of times there's differences of opinion often leadership, union leadership, rank and file members. And I wonder how we deal with that in dealing with unions as the co-op movement, because I assume we're dealing mostly with staff and leadership, if that makes sense.
So also, Josh, some people have said that your audio might be smoother if you turn off your video. And if you happen to have a wired network cable, that might help. I don't know. But I did think I hear you there, which is simply that you're wondering, I think if you're recognizing that unions aren't monolithic structures, and
Correct.
right, and how do we handle it if there's ever inadvertent things, because certain places are really traditional or old school, and like John talked about earlier, less democratic. Charity said, Dennis, I bet you're the only one in the room with a wired cable. Anyway, but what I was going to say, two people. Well done. All right. Not alone. There's solidarity in this room, which is great. So what I would say though, so far, we have not run into any sort of undermining of anything related to our co-ops. I would say there was more opportunities for solidarity. So I want to look into what you're talking about. I want to look into what you're talking about in California. And I'm really interested to learn more. Oh, thanks. Okay, thank you for that. I will read it.
That's my take.
Okay. I will check it out and I'll look into it and I'll talk to Ray. But so I'm super, super curious. But I wondered, John, do you have any other thoughts around this?
Well, it's understanding California law sometimes can be really complicated in its own way. I guess I haven't really done the dive into it, but I think it's something that I would hope that whatever SEIU is putting forward, that they would come to the cooperative community and seek, leadership with us and not try to do something outside of the co-op world. And I think that's one of the reasons it's important for the U.S. Federation to really be seen as, the APEC organization representing worker co-ops in the state and in the country. And if your co-op hasn't joined the U.S. Federation, you should. It's part of being a good co-op in the community. They also actually have really good benefits now for those of you who haven't looked at their benefit package in a while. But it's really, the U.S. Federation should be kind of leading in that field and working with unions as allies. But that's where, we need to be good allies to the unions. They need to be good allies to us too, and we need to build that culture.
Right.
Dennis, do you have a question?
Well, no, just briefly, I think I was going to build on some of what you guys were talking about in the sense that, again, kind of looking at this larger problem, I guess you would say that the unionization movement is attempting to solve in co-ops. And, I guess if we were to talk about the 50 worker, 50 employee threshold, I mean, it makes more sense when you look at it in that direction of, when a co-op is small and when it's, a startup and growing, especially if it adopts a flat structure where, most or all of the members are already members of the board of directors. I mean, functionally, in a way, it is a small union at that point, and it's only after it, it maybe reaches a certain scale where the goal is to try to get the direct democracy aspect back in the workers' hands as much as possible, or I guess you'd say amplify the voice of the workers as much as possible, rather than things getting kind of abstracted along to management. I mean, to me, it feels like that's the problem we're trying to solve. And, the benefits piece and kind of the solidarity with the larger industry and the larger movement, it all makes more sense, I guess you would say, after kind of learning more about it. And I don't even know if the terminology of it kind of needs to get flipped around from the, you know, co-op union movement rather than the union co-op movement, because I think from our perspective as co-ops, we want to be driving, you know, how the adoption of that happens within our organization rather than having some sort of a top-down mandate, like what it sounds like maybe what's going on with this California thing. So, you know, I think there's just kind of a right sizing it and helping with the scale, I think is, as far as I understand it, correct me if I'm wrong, the biggest benefit or one of the largest benefits of unionizing at a certain point.
I see we're almost out of time. I mean, I know there's a break. I'm happy to stick around if people want to keep the conversation going for a few minutes, but I also want to recognize that I think we're at time, right?
Yeah, I was going to say that we should like stop the formal gathering, because interpreting for an hour and 15 minutes is a lot of work, and Julio is doing it on his own. So we should stop so that, you know, people can have their bio breaks for the 4:30 session. We have a bunch of co-op tours that are going to be really cool. But I will leave this room open till 4:30. So if people want to stick around, thank you, John, for that offer, and ask questions. But I just want to make sure everybody gets a chance for a break and that Julio gets a break. This was really great and really interesting. And as somebody who is a former union organizer and is now like a co-op developer, I really love this topic, and I have a million questions. But if we had another hour, you know, we could keep it going. But
I should mention that Cooperation Works is having a session on Monday.
That's right.
And they will be featured Co-op Cincy. There will also be in a couple of weeks doing the Union Co-op Toolkit by Rebecca Lurie. And then later we'll be having a session on multi-stakeholder co-ops and unions as well. So this is definitely, there is a high level of thought about union co-ops right now in the country, and which is great. This is what we wanted 15 years ago.
That's cool that it's 15 years.
Yeah,
that's neat.
Renata?
Thank you all so much. Oh.
Well, I just have a question for Kristen and John, I think, if they're okay with answering more questions.
I'm going to go off video for a few minutes.
Yeah, I see Renata has a hand up too. I don't know, but either way.
Renata,
you can go first, Kimberly.
Oh, this is Hillary. Thanks.
Oh, Hillary, my bad. I'm so
no
sorry.
worries. I guess I'm curious about just sort of the dynamics of what it's like when you have these small co-ops, where you were talking about there's one employee who's not in the union, and that's the manager and the person who has like the power to sign the collective bargaining. And you know, like I feel like my experience with so many startup co-ops is that it's very, you know, people have a lot of camaraderie and like feelings of equality amongst each other, but and so many co-ops start as collectives, and so like how is that affected by, or what's different or what's the same about starting a co-op with this different sort of status or something, with the one person who's not in the union being.
Yeah, I think that's a really thoughtful question. So I think that's why actually we organized our harvest originally, so that every single person was a part of the union, except for the board president, who was me. And well, not originally, but I have been for quite some time. Because there's always a person from Co-op Cincy on the board, and I think they keep me as board president just so that I will negotiate the contract. So what do I want to say here? So I think they were noticing just that same thing. Everyone wanted to be a part of it. At Co-op Cincy, the steelworkers, like we are a staff now of, well, I guess we have 8 people altogether. A number are part-time. But there's like 5 of us that really, I guess, are part of the collective bargaining, or 6 of us that are part of the collective bargaining. Two are contractors. That's why they're not a part at their choice. And I am not, like, so I'm the executive director. So I think I maybe would speak from that particular perspective. And what I would say is I feel like the way that it happens is very inclusive. It's not really outside of any of the things we do. We work on the thing together. Like we have all sorts of, I do sign it, but it's not like, I think, a typical process where I'm really separated from it. I abide by it. I mean, I get my health insurance through it, even though I'm not technically a part of the union. I pay solidarity dues. It really isn't done in, I guess, maybe a more typical way. I think for Susainergy, it was slightly more typical, like Flecker, the CEO, I think he wasn't a part of as many of the organizing conversations, but we had so many organizing conversations together. Like we worked it all out before the rest of the team met with the union representative. So it was all stuff we had discussed. And I don't know, I didn't really feel separate. So I think it's just about how that process goes. And I should actually talk with Flecker and some of the organizations where it's slightly different to see how they feel, to see if it's like how we do it at Co-op Cincy or not.
Yeah, like I mentioned, at Working Systems, it was primarily, they hired a manager from outside who had experience managing software companies, and so it was also someone who was from outside, and so they just made him, he had his own contract, so it's not like he wasn't protected. It's just that part of it is figuring out conflicts of interest, right? So. For instance, actually one of the bigger debates at Working Systems was whether or not stewards could serve on the board of directors, because there was worry about it concentrating too much power into one individual. So, so things like that, I think, have to be work into it, and and then sometimes which union you're with. Like if you're like UE, which might allow your work site to be its own local, then you have to really make sure that officers of the union, they legally can't serve on the board of directors, right? So it's navigating all of that is a little bit extra, but ultimately, it's about just keeping those communications open.
Can I share an idea? So was it Kimberly? Somebody had wanted us to follow up on the notion that individualism creates this barrier for worker co-ops here to really thrive in the way that they do in other, I guess you'd say, cultures. And I feel like we are very much reliant on participation, and individualism sort of undermines that kind of interaction that we really need to have for worker cooperatives. Participation, sociality. There's so many fruits of being social that we really want our members to experience as part of really the payment of being a part of this of that kind of organization. I'm sorry, I'm trying to get to and where I see maybe the need for unions here is that they really might be dealing with that impediment of participation, because they've been a culture to be so individualistic. They don't really want to participate. They don't want to have a voice. But we have a lot of members at Union Cab who like barely get involved in anything, if ever. And and it's tragic. And we work year after year to try and get people to understand the fruits of involvement. Should we have a union, at least their voices would be better represented. Sorry that took me so long to spit out.
Well, thanks for spitting it out. It was interesting. I appreciate thinking about your perspective.
I definitely have a thought on that. And I definitely want to get to Renata, though. I want to make sure that as we're watching the time.
Thank you. Yeah, this might actually connect pretty well with this observation. I just wanted to speak a little bit to how I got to live 2 years in Barcelona, and also like a really strong co-op culture, but getting to experience also like getting to talk to people and see the level of solidarity that comes from this really ancient history, like going through the dictatorship together, and how what they had each other as to save the Catalonian spirit and language. It was just an experience I can't really describe. And I think the way I try to bring that into the circles I interact with is to create, like, I think I went through a period where it's like, oh, it's so terrible that we don't have this type of culture in here. But it's like, well, how can we build it? How can we start some of these traditions? Like, how can we celebrate a once a year thing of something remarkable that happened? Or like, how do we create rituals around when somebody has a baby? Or it just also bringing in, this more heart-centered things that get people involved and like really make it a home for people to show up, and then not have to like definitely worry about the incentives that we can provide monetarily and in security and in health insurance, but like knowing that for me to know that it's not all lost, that I don't have to go through centuries of oppression in order to build this kind of solidarity, that there's other ways we can foster that.
Well said.
Nice. Yeah, I remember once I was in a discussion with someone from the UK about some of these issues, and outside of, well, so the US and Canadian co-op movement is really the UK co-op movement, right? That's where the culture comes from. And when you go to Latin speaking countries, there are worker co-ops everywhere. I visited Asuncion, Paraguay, and there are 30 taxi cab co-ops. It's the city of Asuncion. They're garbage collection co-ops. And thinking, why is that? Why do Latin, even like Quebec has the most worker co-ops in North America, right? French speaking Quebec. So why is that? And I think part of it is that Leo the 13th put out an encyclical on labor in the 1880s that said work should be based on dignity and human rights. And he was trying to thread the needle between Marxism and capitalism of the Gilded Age. And so the countries, I think that's where you see it. And it's not a mistake that two of the biggest co-op movements came out of the Catholic Church. And what's wrong? Everything was wrong with the Catholic Church.
Yeah.
Moses Cody in the Maritime Canadians and Father Esmendi in Mondragon. That is an area where they took those lessons, and it's so. What does that mean for us? I think today we're in a kind of, it's kind of being overused already, but an inflection point from the pandemic, that people realized during the pandemic that mutual aid is important, that we can't just do it on our own. Yeah. And I think that's part of what's driving the current union wave that's coming through, that people have said enough is enough. This individualism isn't working for us. Right. And so we have a moment now. We have a moment to change our culture, and we don't have to follow the myth of the United States of the rugged individual. We can, because that was always a myth, right? And we have a chance now to change the narrative to what it should be, which is more about mutual aid and connection.
Nice. I like that note to end on. I really appreciate all these comments we've just heard. Also, they've been lovely. Thank you. All right.
Absolutely. Yeah, this is really great.
Thanks,
really
everyone.
Honored to be part of it.
Yeah, likewise. All right. Thank you all.
Everyone, feel free to reach out if you ever need a question answered. I'll be happy to answer. So.
Awesome.
Great to see you again, John.
Good to see you too, Dave.